Hello. Looks like we have one viewer so far. From Talking Beards. Oh, it's Yukon. Hi, Yukon. How are you? You guys have me, I'm all alone today, so see how many people we come on, and then we've got a special guest this evening as well. So, two viewers. Let's see if we get any more folks. Right now, we're pretty quiet. So we're up to 3 viewers now. So you guys feel free to say hi. Yukon, no, I did not send any friend requests today. So if you got one from me, please ignore it or report it or whatever. So, yeah, I may have multiple personalities, but I don't have multiple Facebook accounts. So, just you're correct, Yukon. It's not me. So yeah, we're back to 2 viewers. And here on our normal Monday night, first and third Mondays of the month. So we'll give them a few more minutes and see if we get some more viewers in. See what everyone's been up to. But so Yukon, how are you doing? Since I know you'll put a comment out there for me. Christina is out tonight, so she will be joining us next, the third Monday of the month, which will be the 12th. So that'll be cool. I think that's the 12th. The 15th. So Yukon said he's doing great. Maybe I should just send you a link, Yukon, and you can come on and talk to me. So okay, how many minutes are we in here? All right, Dr. Mazie, I'm going to go ahead and bring you in. We don't have a whole lot of viewers yet, but we do have the opportunity to rebroadcast later this month for people to watch as well. So that'll be cool. We're trying to replay some of the shows so people can enjoy them and find out more info about what's going on. So let's see. So would you like to introduce yourself to our audience?
Well, I can do that. I am I am a retired 40-year after 40 years retired from a clinical work. Have a master's in clinical social work and a doctorate in psychology. And I founded a private Christian counseling center outside of the Houston area, and that's where I did my practice primarily. I first started as a youth minister in a church, and then worked as an intern, and then after graduation, worked in a psychiatric hospital, and then set up my clinic and saw hundreds of people individually and families with children, with teenagers, and now retired, but very active in the community I live in. I'm president of a wellness council that is working to improve services and health, particularly around behavioral health in a rural community. So that's kind of my background.
And if you guys haven't heard about Dr. Mazie, if you've been to or heard of the You Matter competition here in LaGrange in January each year, Dr. Mazie's council is the recipient, the charity that we help to donate funds for. So, do you want to tell us a little about that? How you
Oh, I can
started
tell
with
you a
that?
lot about that because if you don't think that God is active in our lives, we came together um, because it was planned and we just all didn't know it. I got a call one day from Shannon Klinkenbeard, and actually, I got a call from a friend of Shannon who said I needed to call Shannon, and I called him, and he explained that there was this group that entered Beard and Whiskers and Beard, am I saying it wrong? Mustache and Beard, that they wanted to donate the funds that they could raise to a charity. And he said, out of a lot of different ones we've approached, you're the only person that's called me back. And I said, well, because I need money for what we're doing. And then I explained to him that our wellness council, which had come from a task force that the county judge in Colorado County had asked me to create something that would bring people together to work on the mental health problems we had for our rural county. And so we started as a very loosely structured task force and then incorporated nonprofit as the Wellness Council. And so we were pushing for a variety of things that we needed for a county. I mean, our county, Colorado County, is geographically almost 1,000 square miles. And yet we only have about 21,000 people that are permanent residents. Now, there's a lot of people from Houston that have been moving out here for their second home. But the people who live here, who work here, do not have services. And so that's what we've been focused on. And from the very beginning, we were to be a solution focused organization. The volunteers said, we're going to make something happen. And so the first thing we need to do, because when there's a crisis with mental health, someone who has chronic mental health crisis, what happens is there's a 911 call, and if they're in the city, the police come to them, and if they're in the county outside of the city limits, the sheriff comes to it. And these are not mental health professionals. And they're supposed to take care of this mental health problem. So usually the individuals end up at the ER. We had 350 visits at the local community hospital in 2021. Or if they get really emotionally distraught and become physically aggressive or violent, or if they've hit like someone in their family already, they're going to go to jail. Well, the ER is not set up to deal with mental health crisis. And the jail is certainly not the place that someone who has a mental disorder needs to go to. And because of the work that I had done previously in Fort Bend County, when back in the 80s, I had helped them get their first mental health deputy, which they now have 16 or so. It tells you how important it is. That's the direction we took. We're going to get a mental health deputy, but we need to raise funds because there were just no funds. All this money for COVID, couldn't use it for mental health deputies, even though COVID created a huge increase
Right.
in mental health disorders. I mean, COVID will make any of us feel bad. I just had it. I had COVID myself in January of 2020 because I went to Rome to study early Christianity. And I got sick the day before I came home, and I came back, and the doctor had no clue other than to say, well, you picked up a bad bug. And 8 weeks later, they talked about COVID, and the first time they talked about it, and they said, And by the way, it's really bad in Italy. And then I went to the doctor, and I knew why I was so. I mean, I was deathly sick. But COVID did create a horrible, horrible crisis for mental health because isolation is not what we're meant to have. I mean, you know, Tricia, you know that the importance of having relationships,
Right.
and even if it's just a spouse or a partner, just having a relationship is what we were born to have. That's we're relational people, and that isolation really hurt U.S. and all of the restrictions that were sent out by CDC that were not based on the research were not appropriate. But you know, like little sheeps, we all did what the government said we should do, right? And I can go off on that all the time. But I will recommend this. If you have not read Robert Kennedy Jr.'s book on the real Fauci, you need to read that book. If I'd had the book in my hand, I would have thrown it across the room. I got so mad 2 or 3 times. As it was on my iPad, I shut my iPad down. I just can't keep reading this. I'm so upset. But it's really important we understand what happened. But anyway, with all of that said, our rural community needed a mental health deputy. So we set as our task to raise $300,000. And the beard and mustache competition that you and your husband created there to be held in LaGrange in January has been a huge, huge and important part of our fundraising. You've made a difference beyond anything I can really describe because we were able, from when we started in like November raising funds, we were able in February to take $165 and donate it to the county so they go ahead and get the mental health deputy who ended up starting May 14th, I think. That's a pretty short window. And I talked to him quite often, and he and I went to Commissioner's Court last week just to give an update. And it's unbelievable how the numbers have dropped. The people that end up in ER or in jail, and how many times there's been a crisis call, and he's responded, and he's been able to de-escalate, which is one of the big things he's trained in.
Mm-hmm.
Escalate these folks that are in crisis. Because, I mean, I learned in my internship working in a psychiatric hospital, there are things you say and there are things you don't say when someone's.
Right.
There are things you don't do. There are things you do. Like he knows that he doesn't go in there with the gun and the bulletproof vest and I'm the authority. He knows that you go in there quietly and you talk to them about what's going on, what do you need, what would help make things better, and he uses all those skills and very well. And now some of the folks that law enforcement has a list for each city and the county. They know who are the people to do this. And so he goes throughout the month and visits. He makes about 40 home visits a month. And just in between whatever crisis he has to deal with, he goes and he visits. How are you doing, John? What's going on? Do you need anything? Can I help you in any way? Are you seeing your doctor? Are you taking your medicine? And he can be encouraging and helpful because people that have chronic crisis wear out their families.
Mm-hmm.
They wear out their neighbors. And so he's able to make that connection back to relationship. And they now call him directly and say, I'm not feeling too good. He says, okay, I'll come by.
Mm-hmm.
And you raise money and you put it somewhere and it immediately makes a difference. That's what's happened. So that's how important the beard and mustache contest is for what we're doing. I mean, it's making a difference in people's lives. So thank you. What a blessing. It is a huge blessing.
Well, it's been great. I've kind of sat a little in the background, which I enjoy, and watched all the work that they've done really for the competition, and just it's really, it's kind of personal to me because I have mental health. I have bipolar too, most people know, um, but very controlled, but have been in that state where it wasn't controlled. And like you said, it's sometimes quite um, sad in how quickly it does run down the family and the friends and so forth.
Mhm.
There just hasn't been in the past a lot of tolerance or support, that people
Right.
can offer. So it's becoming more, people are a lot more knowledgeable now. And I think in the bearding community, it's extremely um, a high priority for the mental health because we've lost many people to suicide. And a lot of people do struggle with it, but there's not necessarily that fear within the community that they can't say anything. They know that it's a very supportive group. So,
That's really amazed me how one, when I first met your husband Shannon, and then we all had lunch that day after we had our meeting, and as a group y'all came to the wellness council's meeting, then we had lunch. Talking to everyone that came that day, everyone had a story. Everyone had a story. And they had found support through the friendships and the relationships that had maintained them.
mhm.
And I mean, like you Tisha, are a wonderful example of the fact that if you have something, you don't have to live with it controlling your life. But you may have to work at finding the right person you're going to see, getting the right medication. Someone said to me, well, I heard this a lot in my practice for years. Well, that medication didn't make me feel right, or I don't like it. I said, well, then let's get the doctor to change it. Well, they might be on the third or fourth. Well, I'm just tired of this. And I tell people, I said, look, I have high blood pressure. I had every side effect you could have on 9 of them. I mean, I had one after another after. It took me the 10th one. I'm on the 10th medication to get my blood pressure under control.
Mhm.
And that's the way it is with the medication for depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, anxiety. You have to find what works for you. So you just can't give up. But
Yeah.
the community that I have met in the beard mustache genre of um, it's been really amazing how supportive they are of each other. And also, one thing I really like that I've heard on some of the Facebook postings is holding people accountable. I mean, if someone starts going off and they go, "Hey, bullshit, Tom," come back, get off of that. It's like you don't need to do that to yourself or to us, kind of thing. And I like that too. As a therapist, I was not a quiet Freudian therapist that sat there and took notes. that was not that was not my way, because I really think that when people come to therapy, sometimes they need, well, in my family growing up, they'd call it the Dutch uncle. I don't know where that saying came from, but if someone needed to tell you what you needed to hear and you didn't want to hear, they would say, well, you're going to get the Dutch uncle now, the Dutch uncle speech. And and I just felt like that as a therapist, when people start giving this little dog and pony show to me and trying to convince me and whine and all this stuff, give me a break. What can you do? You can live as a victim and go on being focused on, oh, how bad it is and poor me, or you can do something about it, because we all have choices. And then he looked at me like, well, aren't you going to give me any sympathy? I said, well, when you give me something to give you sympathy about, I will. But I'm not going to give you sympathy for whining. My gosh, I wouldn't put that up. I don't put up with that for my own children. So anyway, I've loved what I have discovered within the beard and mustache community. I really have.
So,
Shocker.
so I remember the first day I met you was actually the day you were talking about that we came in. And so that was the first time I met you. I didn't get to go to lunch with you guys, but just to give you some, I guess that was the first time you really kind of met some of the others in the community as well. And um, I'll never forget because, I also focus on our craft stuff. But one of our previous co hosts, Summer, was with us that day. And Shannon had given you some pictures for, your presentation. And what all four of us found kind of funny was that oddly enough, you picked three different pictures and all three were of Summer in different beards and costumes.
I
And we were
was
just so
so
shocked.
surprised. That was shocking when I realized that was the same person. I thought that's the most clever thing I've ever seen. I mean, that's like Hollywood kind of stuff, you know? But I was like so impressed. Yes, I still remember that. And when I realized the same one y'all told me, I was like, no. But
And she was sitting right there
I know it's
for you
like
to meet.
you but we have a problem. It's probably true in every culture with stereotyping people. It's like it's like looking at the book cover and making a decision whether that's a good or bad book. I mean,
Right.
and when Shannon and I were first talking, and he was talking about raising money and everything, I said, "Well, I want you to come to the Wellness Council. I want you to come and get your group together and bring a bunch of them and come there." And he said, "Well," let me tell you, we have a lot of hair. We have lots of hair. And
Not on the heads, but
yeah, yes. And he said, and we have tattoos. And he said, if you were a single lady sitting out in your car in Walmart and we walked through the parking lot, you'd probably reach over and lock your door. I said, oh, you're describing like the Duck Dynasty, folks. So y'all come on. I want you to come to the meeting. And so I told several of the officers and other people, I said, now we're going to have guests today. I told them in advance, we're going to have guests today. And I told, they knew the whole story and everything. I said, so don't act weird, don't act surprised, don't act weird. And they're like, okay. Yeah, and several of them came up after the meeting. We were going to, y'all's group, we were going to go eat lunch, but several of the folks came up and said, "You're really very nice. I wouldn't guess people." But I think that that's unfortunate for our communities throughout the United States that we tend sometimes to, and maybe because we had some event or incident along the way, and then we associate that all Hispanics are such and so, or all blacks, or all guys with beards, or whatever. And it's just not the way it is. It's just not the way it is.
so very
People,
true.
people, and people that aren't good are not good, and you find that in Wall Street with business suits and ties on, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
it's been a great experience personally. Though I will say, I worked in a psychiatric hospital. I first as an intern, and then after I graduated, I worked for about a year and a half more. So that was 2.5 years. I probably saw more than most people see. When you're in a
A
you
little bit.
see a whole lot of things that most people don't see. Yeah, at least in that much of it, and that variety. But I think for all the members of the Wellness Council, it's been enlightening and educating, and very positive.
Hmm. Yeah. And one of the other things, so if you guys are wondering, Colorado Valley is really right next to Fayette County where we live, and or Colorado County, which is what Dr. Leftwich is talking about. So it's not in Colorado like some people sometimes think. We thought.
Don't we wish? Not for the politics, just strictly for the beauty of the mountains and the cool air.
And so I know you offer a lot of different services, and just speaking again from me personally, when we moved here, actually, um, we had I'd lived previously in the city, and even when we lived rural in North Texas, I actually went back to the Dallas area to see my physician. And so moving here, it was like, okay, I'm not going to be able to drive 6 hours, to make my appointments, and so I've got to find someone, more local. And it was almost impossible. I was shocked because even as far as Austin and Houston, it was just, well, we're not seeing new patients, and so just the resources weren't there. If I hadn't been
Mhm.
so, knowledgeable about me and how I felt in taking care of myself, I probably would have given up.
Yeah.
And just
And
happened to
you're very fortunate.
find.
You're fortunate now because Fayette has some um, really. They have the Bonnet Trail
Yes, that's what I
Mental
found.
Health Authority.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I found the one in
And
Bastrop, and then LaGrange added theirs really right before COVID, I believe, was when they opened up. But that was kind of the savior in that situation, but because it was still close, we were living in Bastrop then, and they were so helpful. And got into a nurse practitioner. She was just
mhm.
awesome. Because when you've been through this for years and you kind of know yourself, the kind of person that you need. And you hear a lot about people too that they'll be like, well, I just didn't like, you know, that practitioner. I didn't like this, and you do have, I will say, having been through that, you do have to have someone you feel comfortable with at the same time. Um,
Oh
because
yeah, and it's like I don't know. This probably started 30 years or more with me ago. But if my foot hurts, I want to go to a foot specialist, and I want to go to one that I like. And and so my first appointment with doctor, any doctor of any sort, and I've had several specialists because of several health issues. They don't understand. I'm interviewing them. They may be trying to assess me as a patient. I'm interviewing them, and there's been a couple of them where, even though they were recommended, I walked out of that office and knew I'd never go back to them. And when you're going to get involved with a psychiatrist or psychotherapist, counselor, you got to make that connection. You've got to you got to you got to feel good about it,
mhm,
and it means that they are going to tell you what you want to hear. Because I certainly didn't tell people what they wanted to hear.
right.
It was what they needed to hear, and that's really our job as a therapist. And it wasn't that I'm telling you what to do. I'm telling you truth about what I see,
Mhm,
dealing with your problem or you're not dealing with it, that kind of thing. And then if you really get into deep psychotherapy, then your therapist is going to go into underlying issues and causes to try to free you from things that affect the way you make your decisions and the emotional issues from the past that overlay what's going on in your life.
mhm.
You know, but so you got to feel good about them. That doesn't mean you always like what they're going to say, right? But you also have to be determined, and I think that that's I think that's the hard part for a lot of people. They feel so bad and they lack self esteem to the point they just, oh, it didn't work, and then they give up.
Right.
You
Exactly.
didn't, which why I say you are a perfect example of what you have to do. You have to find the right thing. But May is mental. I see that going across the screen.
Uh-huh.
May is Health Month, and we are putting up posters and flyers. We have bracelets. I have one on here. Let's see the other side. A big button about mental health awareness. We're trying to get them to all the schools, all the churches, into businesses, because there is still a stigma.
Mm-hmm.
It's, mental health disorders are biological disorders. They're biologically uh, something not right in the brain. And that can happen because of genetics. I mean, it's just like I've got arthritis because both of my parents had arthritis. Thank you for those genes, you know. But but what went on in our parents, grandparents, and it can be various generations. That genetics, you don't have control of that. And you may have had a strange Uncle Harry, and you got his genes. I mean, that's just it. But the other part is brain trauma. We're discovering in the psychological side of research that a lot of people have brain traumas and they don't understand that. They have had that. For instance, a baby playing on the floor can fall over. They're not stable when they're little, can fall over and hit their head on the side of the couch's leg. And they cry, and mom or dad pick them up and comfort them, never understanding that that baby has a concussion. And without brain imaging, you're never going to know that that's there. And I mean, people fall out of beds, babies fall out of beds, cribs, fall down, or high chairs fall over, all those kind of things. And then you've got all these sports and the contact sports that I really don't like, the soccer and the contact football for the small children, because they're taught to hit with their head or they get hit bad by the other player, and all of that. This brain is fragile. That
Right.
the skull is really not a great place. It's actually, there's four pieces of plates that come together in the brain. Four different pieces. So your brain's divided into four, and those plates come together. But when those plates come together, they come together, and there's a ridge down underneath it. So when you get bumped or hit or fall over or whatever, those ridges can dig down into the brain tissue. So a lot of people have brain injuries and have no idea that that's why they have a problem. And then, of course, trauma, just trauma in
Mhm.
general. There's just so much. I mean, it's so sad how much child abuse there is, emotional, physical, and sexual. Um, and then fires, hurricanes, auto accidents, though all of those things that are traumatic, they put an imprint on the brain, and then that all of these things I'm describing create neurological issues where the happy, I'll call them the happy transmitters in the brain are not going back and forth between the neurons like they should. They're neurotransmitters, and they're being created or they're not being received as they go from one neuron to the other. And so we have such compassion for people with cancer or someone who's dealing with diabetes. But those are not any different than the mental health disorders because they're all diseases, biological. And I mean, I had lung cancer a year ago. I don't smoke. I didn't live around refineries. I wasn't exposed to asbestos. I had lung cancer. And I was very fortunate because it was picked up not in search of it, but just making sure that my lungs were clear because I was having a little trouble with one of the blood pressure medicines. And
Uh-huh.
oh no, you don't have any fibrosis or anything, but there's a spot there that we're worried about. Well, it turned out to be cancer, and it was itty bitty because it was very, very early. and they removed one section of my lungs, and I didn't never have any pain. And 6 weeks later, I sang a solo in church, so I recovered very nicely. But talking to the doctor, they said, "Well, even though you're not a smoker, look back in your childhood. What were you exposed to?" And I said, "Well, my dad smoked, all my uncles smoked." And they said, "That cancer is the slow growing kind. You could have had that growing, even though it was very small. It could be growing one cell at a time, year after year, since you were a child." Okay. Everybody is so upset because I have lung cancer. I mean, and I thanked all my friends, my church family, everybody's praying for me. And I was fortunate. They removed that one section. I didn't have to have chemo. I didn't have to have radiation. But I had all this sympathy coming from me. But if I suddenly had a depressive disorder and I couldn't get out of bed and I couldn't get up and do my normal activities to take care of me, I don't think I'd have gotten that kind of compassion. But it would have been the same thing. It was a disease. And that's what we have to change.
Mm-hmm.
We have to change that people don't think about it as someone's weak or they're just being lazy. You know, you hear those things. I hear a parent or a spouse say, "Well, she's just lazy." I said, "No, you have no idea that there's no energy in that person. There is no energy for them to get up and go brush their teeth, much less get dressed, clean up, clean the house, cook, take care of the kids. There's nothing there. It's like a car without a battery in it. You know what I'm talking about?"
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like you can want to, you can say I should, but you can't. And so I know I'm preaching to the choir to you because you know all about it. But this is part of the big goal of the Wellness Council. That's why we've got posters and bracelets for the kids. We have these great tattoos, water tattoos for the little kids, and they love all those tattoos. They don't even know what they say, but I know someone that looks at it will figure it out. Yeah. So we're just trying to get the word out, and and hopefully in the process of that, people will um, begin to see, how important it is to look at people with mental health issues as people who are hurting and need compassion and need support.
Yeah, and it's with my father was a traditional bipolar, and there were many times that I would see him just literally in a fetal ball, on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
And so you felt very helpless with that as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then as an adult, I struggled with it, and they would the physician would say, I'd say, "Oh, yeah, my father's bipolar," and they're like, "Well, but do you go on these big spending sprees or do?" And I'm like, "Well, no." But it was always just kind of like, "Okay, well, you don't do weird things, so, you know."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, I know. I know. My father was depressed, and he was what I'd call functional depressive,
Mhm.
in that he always worked. He never was jobless. He was never staying at home in bed and not going to work. But he was angry, and everything irritated him. And come Sunday, even though he grew up as he went to church every day, and as a young man, he was a deacon in the church. But by the time I came along, this depression, he could hold it together to work through the week. He'd come home from work and he'd be irritable and sometimes very angry about I don't know what. But on Sundays, he was in bed all day long. He didn't get out of bed. Well, he'd go in bed and walk to the kitchen, get something, and he put on a tremendous amount of weight. But it was so hard to the father I loved was a lot of times a monster. And he hit my sister, and I saw that. I was very little, and that didn't happen to me, but I watched that, and um, I didn't even understand it until I was in my 30s and gotten through school and understood that, well, a lot of people that are oppressed are not sad and mopey and crying. They are angry people.
Hmm.
And and they'll say, well, they just had a bad temper. Well, no, he was depressed and had a bad temper. So, yeah, growing up in that is very confusing for a child.
And a lot of times it can be a feeling kind of hopelessness as well. You
Oh, yeah.
that's another big at times in my life I felt, and I know a lot of people um have, spoken about that before too. So that's
Well, as
another
a
big
child,
thing.
you have no control over anything.
Hmm.
Watching. When my father would start hitting my sister and yelling at her, I would disappear. And once everything calmed down, my mother would come looking for me, and then my father would come looking for me. And a lot of times they had trouble finding me because what I would do is go into different people's closets, and I'd go to the very back corner. And I mean, these were not big glass closets, but we had a little track home. But I would go to the closet where the longest clothes were, and I'd get in the corner, and the clothes would be covering me up, and you couldn't see me. And I was quiet. I was hiding. You know? And obviously, it was a little traumatic for me. I know that's why I went into psychology. I mean, you come from these different experiences, and I always had compassion for people, and um, I don't know. I could say I felt their pain, but I knew the pain. I knew the pain of the confusion and the sadness and such. And so I know that's why I went into it. But yeah, we just got to do more to help people that have these needs. And like our rural, there in Fayette County, you have more services we have. Well, you have about 11,000 more people, and your mental health authority has all rural counties. Well, you have like 32, 33,000. We have 21,000 in Colorado County. We have a lot less services. And our mental health authority also has to take care of a very big, large county, Fort Bend County, that's very much like a Houston suburb. And so, even though they spend a lot of money in our county compared to I think we send them like 15,000 a year from the county, and they spend like $1.5 million. We need 4 or 5 thousand, 4 or 500, well, 4 or 500, $4 or 5 million to bring more services.
Hmm.
And it's not there, you know. And so, yeah, I've referred some people over to Fayette County, and or they have to go into Katy or something, you know. But it's not here locally.
Hmm. And so, what are the services that are provided? I know that you do more than just mental health. I think.
Well, okay, so the state of Texas is divided into regions identified as local mental health authorities, LMHA, and they are given the responsibility of caring for the uh, severe illnesses, and they have clinics. We have Texana here in Colorado County, and they have a psychiatrist, and they have some clinical social workers and LPC counselors. But the state says you take care of the chronic depression, anxiety, bipolar, schizophrenia, psychotic diagnosis. But a lot of families are dysfunctional, but you couldn't really put a diagnosis on them. You know what I'm saying?
Uh-huh.
They had bad parenting. They didn't learn how to parent properly. They're not doing a good job as parenting. They're maybe not be doing a good job in their marriage, and the kids are all acting out. Well, that doesn't qualify to go to a local mental health authority. And then what happens is that family continues to gyrate in this dysfunctional manner, then you end up with depressed and anxiety and stuff developing in it. But it has to get really bad before it qualifies for what the state says they can service. So we have that. We have our local mental health authority, and I would say there's good people working there, and they do what they're allowed to do, but they can't do all the things we need. And we've had a couple of private practitioners part time, but um, insurance doesn't always pay, and people don't have the money, and that's a big issue. And then we have parts of society that just don't seek help. We particularly see the lowest income who have huge stressors do not seek help because they don't have the money. They may have transportation issues. Then the Hispanics don't get out of their Hispanic community and they don't seek help. Um, the blacks do not seek help as a culture. They are they have less services delivered because they don't seek help. But then their challenge many times in lower economics is about we can't afford it, we can't get there, and you know there's some funny stuff that goes on out there too. Some particular denominations religiously feel like that if you prayed enough, you could make it go away. That your faith isn't strong enough. Which, I mean, I'm also an ordained Methodist minister. Faith is very important to me and my well-being. So I think I'm pretty clear about faith and the importance of it in people's lives. But I would never, ever support someone who thinks that you have depression or bipolar or whatever because you don't have enough faith. That's not that's not true. But there are certain denominations that really promote that, and they just preach it. I mean, they preach it regularly. Um, and then I think there's still enough segregation culturally that people are so uncomfortable to get out of their cultural community that they're just not going to go get help.
Mm-hmm.
Those are hard barriers to get past. I worked with, my gosh, culturally, ethnicity. I can't tell you how many different groups of that I worked with. I remember the first time a Muslim came to see me. And I asked him, I said, okay, you come to me and you're sitting down in my waiting room and you see crosses up there. You know I'm a Christian. Why would you come to me? I am thrilled that you have sought help and I will help you. And my faith will not be part of trying to get you to change your faith. But I'd like to understand why it comes. And the most amazing answer was because you were a Christian, I thought we could trust you. Really shocked me. I had Indians that came. They usually brought me little God gifts, like little elephants or whatever, just to make sure it was covered. And they knew I was Christian. They knew it was a Christian counseling clinic, but that was pretty important, important to them. That little elephant sitting there, so I just left that elephant sitting there on one of the coffee tables. But we do have the different cultural or ethnic groups that have some erroneous thinking about treatment.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so there's a lot of work to do. We're focusing, the Wellness Council is focusing specifically on the foundational level of educating and awareness. And, people hear things often enough. Well, you can see it in the political world. If people hear the same thing over and over, even if it's not true, they'll believe it because they've heard it so many times.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're just trying to give the truth over and over with the same philosophy that if we just keep saying there's treatment, here's the 988 crisis line, you can call, you can text, You can you can speak in Spanish, you can write in Spanish, and you text. They do all of that. If we keep saying that there's treatment, you don't have to live this way, that maybe people will eventually get that. you know.
Yeah. And it just I thought about it, but at my company that I work for now, um actually my boss introduced me to it's the mental health group. They call it Lift, um for North America. And
Mm-hmm.
he shared with me his story of his son was I believe he's schizophrenic, and so he's had to
Mm.
deal with all of that in addition, to being this, vice president. So, um, but he's the corporate sponsor for it, and it's really I was really excited to hear that and to be able to join that group because
Oh yeah.
I was telling him what the beard competitions do, how they contribute to charities and do the charitable work. And of course, whenever you tell somebody that, they are like, "You what?" Um, and so he was very interested, and he's like, "Okay, so sometime in the next months, you need to present to the group and talk about bearding and how it's helping the charities and the different things that it does." And so it was like, okay, well, here I thought I was really weird for doing this, which some may say, um, but to actually know that what you're doing is something that people would be interested in and how it can make a difference, and just bringing the awareness to them of all these groups out here that are, all the bearded people all over the world are, trying to pay back to
Yeah.
their communities as
Uh-huh.
well. So,
Well,
and that's,
I want to say one thing that I think is really important for the bearded community to understand. Every one of us needs connections with people that we feel comfortable with and we share some basic values with. We are not just relational one on one, but we're relational in groups.
mhm,
And the groups that we belong to are part of our identity. And when I went to the first contest, I saw a huge diversity of people, really a diversity. And as a social scientist, I look at all of that. I look at the culture, I look at the ethnicity, I look at the uh, just all of the things there that show our differences as well as our similarities. But you had a huge diversity in people, but you had a homogeneous group. Does that make sense?
uh-huh, exactly.
There was a homogeneous group. There were shared values and many shared experiences. And that's part of the identity. And we have to have that connection and identify with groups to feel okay. So, besides the good work that you do to give, raise funds for meaningful work that's taking place, for the members of your group, you are providing that. And I'm going to say this because I don't like to talk about safe places like on college, some of that ridiculous stuff, but you provide a safe environment for people to be who they are
Mhm.
without condemnation or criticism. You know, we're different, but we're alike.
Uh-huh. And what's
And
always interesting to me too is there are people I've known for years in bearding, but I couldn't tell you what their job is. I could not tell you what they do for a living
yeah,
because it's just, I mean, there are some that, yeah, I know what they do, but it's, I know them as themselves, not
yeah,
something
it
they
doesn't matter.
do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, I think that's so important. I mean, people get their identity and their okayness about who they are by a lot of different things. I mean, if you see some people who they are is, I'm an Aggie. I mean, that is strong. That is the strongest thing about how they define themselves. And then you find people, well, I'm a Baptist, or I'm a Methodist, or I'm a Catholic. And then you have, well, I'm in the Lions Club, I'm in the Rotary. I mean, there's all these different ways that we can define ourselves. Um, but I just, and I think there's reasons why we go to those different groups and everything, part of how we're raised, but what we discover about ourselves and such. But I don't know. I just thought in the bearded community there's a real acceptance. It's very broad and non-condemning, and that's that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Oh, anyway, I won't grow a beard to get in your contest, but I'm going to be at the contest.
Well, I remember you made a beard last year, but didn't compete.
Oh no, well, I mean, I did do a little funny thing, yes.
So we'll have to remedy this for next January.
Oh, well, maybe so. I don't know that I have the artistic art. I'm going to tell you though, you ladies, y'all are just phenomenal. I am so impressed with how clever and artistic and the work and the details of what you do. I just love it. I just love it. That's
Well,
like,
thank you.
I've got those pictures on my phone. So let me show you this. What is that? And I thought, look at that, and I saw these different people and said, really? And I go, yeah. And they're like, there's so many people. I mean, I didn't know. Before I talked to Shannon today, I had no idea.
Yeah.
They're
And people say,
around the
well,
world,
that's a
phenomenal.
unique hobby. Well, but it's, it's a lot of fun, and it does push your creativity, which I think is also good for you on a regular basis to
Oh, absolutely. So
kind of think
what are you
differently.
planning on this year? What's your
Well, let's
can you
see.
share?
We have Worlds coming up in June, and they're only doing realistic, sadly. But our club uh, is now a member of the World Association, so hopefully we can make some difference in that. That's one of the, I guess, my dreams with the club is, to be able to go and to represent, the women for the most part, but anybody that's going to do a craft beer, but typically on the world level, it's, kind of the women do that. Um, so I started trying my hand at a realistic mustache, and I'm just
I haven't got there yet.
number one, it doesn't look all that great, and number two, it's not as much fun as my creative beards, I have to say. So
Well, maybe for next year, what you do is let your hair grow long and then get it woven into a mustache.
yeah, I don't know. I would be more like that, you know,
That one woman had hers and brought it around and all
uh,
that.
yeah, Tiffany. Uh-huh.
I thought that was clever, but I was just thinking I'd take that long hair and I'd go find, where they make wigs and get them to make me a mustache out of it.
Yeah, because I was considering that for my world's mustaches, getting my usual hair trim, and then well, it's just not turning out very well. So
Well, I hope we get there.
uh, well, thank you for coming on with me tonight. I was um co-hosting solo, so you're my standing co-host.
I enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah. And just like I said, I really appreciate it. And for just coming on, you're welcome anytime you want to come on and chat with us. So you
Okay,
just let me know.
I will do that.
We'll do that. But since now we're just at 8 o'clock, so I think we'll just wrap it up. And thanks to everybody for joining us. And if you listen to this on the rebroadcast, give a shout out, and we'd love to hear from you. So with that, good night.